Hey guys, so we of course just had the NAWCQ, so as usual I wanted to go over the most played hand traps and staples among the topping deck lists that were available. So before I continue, a big thanks to my sponsors as always, links and discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh supplies below. So this was what the top 64 breakdown look, and a big thanks to Card Launcher Store for making this amazing breakdown. Definitely go check them out, and I'll also link down some amazing meta resources as well that you can check out. So Kashtira, of course, the most represented deck, not surprising at all. You already saw this in yours last week. They had more Dragon Link though, whereas at the NAWCQ we did have more Spright and Branded, but you know, Dragon Link is still around there. And Rikka, maybe not as big of a showing, or at least it didn't win the event unlike Euros, but still there. And Pearly actually had a bit of a big uptick as well. So in terms of the deck lists that are actually included in this video, because I can only go with what's publicly available, because not everyone does deck profiles, this is sort of what the pie chart looks like, and nonetheless it kind of looks similar to the overall breakdown, but you know, just keep in mind as I'm going through some of the most played hand traps and staples, just that I do not have all of the lists available, and maybe the order would change a little bit if I did. So in terms of overview of hand traps in the main deck, the median was still around 6 hand traps, which is the same as Euros. And so, to be honest with you, I actually thought it would start declining a little bit, just because we already saw that we're in a talents format. We also have thrust, and so you do get heavily punished sometimes, or maybe I should say a lot of times, when you hand trap them, especially when it's not really high impact. So kind of interesting to see. Maybe it's just still kind of like that, you know, minimum number for perhaps, but you know what, kind of curious to see where we're going to go with this. In terms of the side though, it actually went up, funnily enough. I mean, there are definitely decks where, for example, they might load up on like board breaking cards in the main, but then have some dedicated specific hand traps depending on the matchup. Let's say something like Ash for Branded or something like that in the side. So this might make a little bit more sense as well. And then in terms of going second board breakers, the median number was 6, which is actually around the same as we saw in Euros. But of course, if you were to compare to a little bit before Euros, this is actually still higher. And compared to, you know, like historic trends wise, in terms of main deck board breakers, this is definitely on the higher end. And so, you know, we're kind of going towards that route again with hand traps and talents format. It's kind of hard, and a lot of people I can see why, you know, kind of go away from at least main decking hand traps and going towards more powerful board breakers. In terms of the side, this went up a little bit though compared to also in the past, but nonetheless it's kind of around the number that you normally see. So I think it makes sense. There's just a lot of really strong board breakers that are available at the moment, but oftentimes, you know, they might not be enough, because let's say something like Gimmick Puppet Lock, like you just can't really do too much regardless of the kind of board breakers you draw, so it's kind of format dependent. Now let's just cover the most played hand traps, and we're going to start with Ash again. This is not surprising. We've seen this for a while. We also saw it in Euros, and we also saw this trend where actually a good third of decks will like side deck Ash, even though for the most part historically it's always been just a card that you main deck or don't play at all. But right now you have decks like Branded and Labrynth where Ash is very, very impactful, and it's kind of worth siding for if you can't fit it in your main deck. We also have Ghost Spell. This was also the second most played hand trap at Euros as well, so it definitely has good applications in the format. For example, against Branded, against Labrynth again, can be definitely useful. And against something like, you know, Kashtira, Floowandereeze, not really the best. Against Spright, I guess it's not really amazing either, now that, for example, there's no Elf, there's no Toad for the most part, although I guess like in terms of Runick variants, you can kind of stop the Runick Fountain draw for like one turn, but you know, is that really enough? I'm not too sure, but nonetheless, not as generic as Ash, but honestly it can hit most decks as well. Next we have Droll, which I guess is a bit of an uptick maybe compared to just the past couple big tournaments that we've had. I mean, you know, it's since Super Heavy Samurai and Pearly sort of got hit really early in that ban list, people I think kind of started playing Droll less and less, but I think it still had some applications. Obviously, if you draw it against something like Labrynth, yeah, it sucks, and definitely, I mean, 4 decks did main deck it though, but I guess most decks, if they do play it, they're probably going to side it, because against certain matchups it can really be devastating, right? I mean, against Floowandereeze and Kashtira, it's also kind of iffy though, because if they don't have Shifter, it's great. If they do, then it's completely dead, because the card does have to go to the grave. So you know, definitely something not everyone's gonna play, but in terms of its impact, I think it still has application in the current format. Next we have Imperm, which of course, you know, is a good card. Is it high impact? Not really for the most part, but you know what? The great thing about Imperm is that it does play around talents and thrust, because it is not a monster effect but a trap. And it's kind of funny because I actually just made a comment in my last video how Imperm historically, if it's played, it's only main decked, but now we actually did see at least one list side deck it, so that's kind of interesting. Maybe gonna start a new trend perhaps. And then we have Nibiru. So this actually saw a good amount of play in Euros as well, even though prior to that, in terms of regionals, post-ban list, it wasn't seeing, you know, a huge amount of play, but definitely goes back and forth in between formats as well as within the same format. That's always been the case for Nibiru, and so it can definitely catch a lot of people off guard. So definitely, I think it's still worthwhile trying to play around Nibiru if you can, because otherwise you might get really heavily punished. So next we have Bestials, and this picture represents more so Magmanut and Druid's-Worm, because if you're playing it, you're probably playing both just so you can search that Druid's-Worm off of the Magmanut. And so I made a comment about this in the last breakdown video of Euros, because it's kind of weird because, you know, against certain matchups, let's say like against Brandon or Labrynth, like it can be great, but then against certain matchups like Floowandereeze, Kashtira, or even Rikka, it's really bad. So it's very, very, you know, there's a huge disparity. So I can see why it might start going down a little bit. For now, I do think it still has application, but it's definitely going to be a little bit iffy. I think Dragon Link is seeing a lot of play, right? You saw competitive success in Euros, some good success at NAWCQ as well, and so I can still see Konami perhaps limiting this card just because it's really, really good. And throughout, you know, as we move along in future formats, this card will probably always see some kind of play, because light and dark, you know, most Yu-Gi-Oh monsters are that attribute, and it definitely usually shits on rogue decks hard as well. And then we have Shifter. We kind of saw it around this level at Euros as well. I mean, it's a card that is definitely really strong. I personally think it does need to be hit because it can just shut down a lot of other decks, and it's just not very interactive gameplay. But of course, right now, because the best deck in Kashtira banishes a lot of things, so, you know, Shifter is usually not main decked, or at least I thought it would not be. But you know what? Almost half of them main decking it if they did play it. I guess because they just take the risk that, you know what, most other decks will fold to Shifter. And then we have Chaos Hunter. We saw this at Euros as well. I guess it's kind of interesting, you know, kind of like opposite of Shifter. You know, you're trying to just completely stop your opponent from being able to banish their cards. So this definitely saw some play when Spright was first kind of meta as well, that Joshua Schmidt kind of showed through the Mannequin Cat line. But you know what? I think it's really cool that an old hand trap like Chaos Hunter is coming back a bit in play as well. And then we have some other hand traps that's not really seeing that much play, like something like a Vec Failure. Again, because it's Talents format, it's probably not that great to play, and if you're going to play something like Monster Negation, Infinite Impermanence is probably better. But at the same time, if you're a deck that, let's say for example, you draw on like your opponent's turn, then Veiler can be better just because it will actually be live, whereas if you draw Imperm and, you know, your opponent's actually still doing their stuff, and, you know, it's probably not dead because you control like a monster or a card in general. So just things to keep in mind. And then similar to that vein, we also have Mourner, which is of course, you know, another kind of monster negation card, which has slightly different applications than Imperm and Veiler. So I can see why certain decks will play it. And it's also a win, which for certain decks, like let's say for example Mathmech, I know it didn't top, but it can have like small world bridges, so it definitely has some interesting aspects to it as well. Moving on to board breakers, again, we are in a Talents format. It was the most played staple, at least among the topping lists that were publicly available, and definitely if it is played, it's being main deck. So you do have to really be aware of this, especially when you're like hand trapping your opponent. Me personally, at least I'm playing Brandon right now, I'm sort of taking out the small number of hand traps that I'm playing with when I'm going second, just because I don't want to get punished by Talents, and I'd rather just have board breakers. And Feather Duster was also tied for first. I mean, we've been seeing this the last few formats, really. Like, you have a deck like Labrynth, like you need back row blowout cards, and so even a lot of decks are main decking it, even though it is, of course, something you can really only use going second for the most part, but there's no drawback, so might as well play it. And then at a close second, we do have Dark Ruler. Not too surprising, we've been seeing this in a high level of play now for quite a couple months. I mean, for example, let's say if any kind of Spright variant is in the meta, you're definitely always going to see Dark Ruler. You also have something like Kashtira, now that they do not have Mind Hacker. They're not doing like the Zone 5 kind of play anymore, at least not turn 1. So Dark Ruler is actually kind of useful as well. And just in general, it's like one of the better going second generic cards to have. We also have Cosmic Cyclone. This was another card that's been very, very high up in terms of play. You have, you know, a lot of Runick variants right now, and Cosmic Cyclone is probably like the best one to have. You know, even going first, like Cyclone is very, very useful in this current format. Something like Kashtira, they have Rebirth that you can get rid of. Branded, they have Branded Loss. Labrynth, just any other back row really. So a really, really good card to have, and definitely better than Twin Twisters for quite some time now. And then we have Thrust, and I'm actually kind of surprised this didn't see even more play, considering that we saw Talents being played in, you know, a lot of decks as well. So my friend Drew made a good point. He actually thinks Thrust is like the best card in the game right now, and I kind of agree with that. It's really, really strong whether you go first or second. You know, if you're getting hand trapped when you go first, and you're gonna set something as powerful as something like Eradicator or even D-Barrier going second, you can just essentially get something like, you know, Feather Duster, Dark Hole, Regeki, whatever. It's really gonna swing things, and if if you're playing something like Striker, I'm sure getting that engage is very, very delicious as well. So really, really strong card, and I do think it's definitely one of the more powerful ones in the current format. And then we have Evenly Matched, which is, I guess, another card you could search off Thrust and is really strong. If Lightning Storm got semi-limited, I honestly can't see why this would not get semi-limited in the future, even though, don't get me wrong, I think that's really kind of weird. But at the same time, Evenly Matched is definitely, I think, probably the best board breaker card out there. Just being able to banish face down is super strong right now, and against a lot of decks in this current format, this can be very, very strong. We also have Book of Moon. We kind of saw this see a lot of play at Euros as well. I mean, Kashtira generally has played this quite a bit, and also something like Flunder, they usually play this as well, play around, something like Imperm, but also going first and you being able to set this against certain decks, like let's say like Dragon Link, where they're like very Link heavy, being able to like Book of Moon, like a first normal summon in a lot of decks can be pretty devastating actually. And then we have Call by the Grave, so this definitely is not seeing as much play as it used to, but you know what, and especially the fact that it's even being sided a lot now, just because I guess when people go first, they want to make sure they don't want to get hand trapped or they want things to go through, but a lot of cases like this can be good, not just for hand traps, but just most decks really have some kind of effect that they can activate from Grave, and you being able to stop that is pretty flexible and a pretty good card to set going turn 1 as well. And then we have Lightning Storm that we've already kind of spoke about in terms of, being able to add off Thrust. Got semi-limited, which was really weird, and I don't think anyone really expected that. But you know what, being able to blow up back row monsters, pretty nice to have, and definitely seeing a good amount of play lately. And then we have Anti-Spell Fragrance, definitely not a card that I like to see. I think it personally should be banned. I don't like cards that just completely shut down mechanics. So it's 8 cards, or rather 8 decks out of the 37 that were available playing Anti-Spell. Maybe not that high, but it's really strong when it's paired with something like a Negate, and it's very hard to get through. So hopefully it goes away soon. We also have Pancratops. Definitely been seeing some good amount of play the last month or two now. You know what? It's solid going second. Like you can pop back row, pop monster, or just attack over a monster. It's got a pretty strong body to boot, and similar to the likes of Fenrir, is definitely a good side going second card to have in your deck. Next, we have Eradicator Virus, which of course we all know how strong it is. We've now seen multiple times now in, like, let's say final streams where this card just rips out like 5 spells. And I get it, there are some people who think that this card should not get banned, but for me, again, as I don't like cards that just completely shut down mechanics, I really do think this card should be banned. I'm surprised it didn't get banned already. We've already seen from the time when Spright and Tearlance first came out, like that whole Griffin combo went to Eradicator, or even like Runick Spright, just being able to go into 3200 Gigantic so easily, and being able to, if you have access to Eradicator, that was pretty deadly. And so now we have something like Labrynth, you have something like Kashtira, and then in combination with something like Thrust, being able to set that Eradicator when you go first, when you got hand trap, is far too strong, and I do think that this card will get banned in the next list. And then we have Kurkara. We've been seeing this lately as well, and definitely something, as if there's like any Vanquish Souls in the top cut, which there were, you're always going to see this in their list just because it is a fire, so it has some added benefits as well. And it also provides a big body to boot, and being able to special summon from your opponent's grave in each end phase is pretty nice as well. And then we have Enemy Control. This is kind of interesting because even though Ibli is not super common anymore, I was definitely seeing some Ibli in some of the topping lists and just in a lot of people's deck lists in general, and it can really shut down a lot of decks, right? Like for example, like Branded, like you will honestly just straight up lose if you get Ibli locked and you don't play any kind of side card to get out of that situation, because you're realistically your only hope is something like Bestial, the one Serenir that you're probably playing. So really sucks. So definitely a card that's not surprising that it's on here. And lastly, we have Forbidden Lands, which is more so a Kashtira special. This is something you mainly see only in that deck, just so they can like protect their Kashtira Rise, or maybe sometimes Shangri-La, I'm not too sure. But definitely something we've seen for quite some time and not really used in most other decks. But I guess if they are a deck that kind of sits on like some kind of like Floodgate monster, let's say like Vanity's Fiend, I'm not sure. But paired that with Forbidden Lands is probably pretty strong. Alright, so let's cover some tech choices in terms of cards that were played only in like a small number of lists, and there was one branded list that played Grisai Prison, which to be honest with you, I've actually never seen in my life, and so I did take a read at it, and I guess it kind of serves as like another way of like a D barrier in a way, except only for Synchro and Xyz summoning. So I'm not too sure how good this is in this format. Someone let me know, because for example, let's say against Kashtira, we've always heard that D barrier is not really that amazing. They can definitely still OTK under D barrier, so you know what, I'm not sure why I choose this instead of D barrier, for example. So definitely someone let me know. The other one, I saw another like one Kashtira list playing Blizzard. This is kind of an interesting one. I guess if I'm understanding the wording properly, which is hard because I'm a Yu-Gi-Oh player, I guess it kind of negates essentially any kind of spell. Although it does like let the opponent get that spell back to their hand instead of going to the graveyard. So definitely also let me know how relevant this is in the current meta. I'm honestly not smart enough to think about it on the spot at the moment, so I'm looking forward to that in the comments. And finally, we also saw a list play Mistaken Arrest, or at least a few lists actually, and so this is not new. Definitely, I believe we saw this back in like 2019-ish. Essentially, it kind of serves as like another way of Droll. I guess it at least plays around like Talents or Thrust in this current format now that those cards are so popular. So definitely something maybe you can consider in your side deck choice. So that was it for the hand trap and staple breakdown of the NAWCQ. Hopefully you found that useful in terms of helping you prepare for your events. Definitely had a blast personally at the NAWCQ. It was really fun. I was really happy to see a lot of you who came up to say hi to me. So a big thanks to you and all of you for watching this video. A huge thanks to my Patreons as always for supporting the channel, and well, take care guys.